Yeah, I'm Ron Martin, and was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, back in early times like 1934. I had great parents, and I had those five children. Actually, there was six, but that was a little guy named Rodney, and he died at about age 4, and I never got to meet him, so I have to wait till I get to heaven for that part of the family.
Yeah.
So, but uh, had just an absolutely wonderful mom and dad, and everybody that ever met my mother stayed with her as a friend for life. We had roomers and boarders to make ends meet. My dad was a machinist and didn't make a lot of money. She realized that they would never own a home unless she got involved. So she had the idea of getting a big house and having roomers and boarders. And so they purchased this house, which had gone back to the bank, and so they were dealing with the bank, and they bought it for $5,000, and they paid that off in 5 years, which is incredible, from not having a home and wondering if you'd ever be able to afford one, to have one and to have it mortgage free. Wow, that was pretty big. Yeah, I remember they took the mortgage slip that they had that was showed paid in full, and they took and they burned it up. There was no more mortgage. So
Why was it that your mom thought that the only way they'd have a house is if she made something happen?
well, my dad was a machinist, didn't make a lot of money. There was 5 of us kids, and looking out into the future, she had to do something, and buying a big house and having roomers and boarders and having the income, uh, she thought was the answer, and as it turned out, it was. So it's a good thing she had that idea, or they never would have had a home. Because even when I was, a teenager, I think my dad was making around $95 a week.
I hear you were, I mean, you still are a natural leader. How do you think that came to be when you were the youngest in the family?
Survival. Yeah. uh, I don't know. I guess I always wanted to be able to have a little change in my pocket, and I determined the only way to do that was to work. So I picked up a paper route, I think at about age 11. Uh, it was called the Times. I think the Star Journal bought them out eventually. But so I delivered papers for quite a while, and that was morning, evening, and Sundays, so it was busy. And I had a paper route for probably 3 years, so quite a while. Didn't make a lot of money at it, but a little change. And then I worked after that, I guess, as a busboy for Becky's Cafeteria up on Hennepin and Lake in Minneapolis. And they were a nice Christian couple that owned it. I enjoyed that. And then I, uh, I sold silverware for a gentleman by the name of Fields, and that was interesting. I was the youngest guy they had ever hired, but did fairly well with it, so it kind of got me moving in the direction of sales.
Hey, my name is Barbara Gail Johnson Martin. I've been a Martin for over 61 years. I was born in Chicago, Illinois. My mom and dad my dad had been born and raised there, but my mom was raised in the country in southern Minnesota. But she met my dad when he came up to work on the farm with his uncles. And my mom lived up there, and her brothers were friends of theirs, so they introduced them. So when she was really young, I don't know, 18 maybe, she left the farm and moved down to Chicago so she could be near my dad. But it was during the Depression, and she had to get a job. She had no further education in 8th grade. So she got a job being a nanny to a family that had 2 little children. I don't remember the boy's name, but she told me the little girl was Barbara Gale. And that's why she named me Barbara Gale, because she thought so much of that little girl. And being she had a job, $5 a week, which I guess maybe in 33 it probably was a lot of money. I don't know. Not enough to get by on, but she lived with the family. She would give my dad a little money to take a streetcar to come and see her, because he had no job at all during that time. He lived with his family. The family was very poor. So I guess everybody pretty much was poor back then. So they married in 35. She borrowed a wedding gown from a friend and had a nice wedding out on the farm. She told me one time that one of the gifts that they got was a dishpan that they had gotten from all her brothers and sisters went together to buy a dishpan. So that's all they could afford during the Depression. So it was hard for them. But my brother was born in 37. I was born in 39. And we had a great life. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had the Lord. My mom and dad were Christians and brought us up to love Jesus, and we went to church. And at an early age, I found out that I had a voice, that I could sing and praise the Lord. And so I started singing even as just a little child. I sang at a wedding, in a funeral for a little boy that had passed away from polio during the polio epidemic, and they wanted me to sing at his funeral. I was only about 12 or 13. So that kind of started a career of singing in church.
When did you meet Barb?
I would have met her in 1954. I met her at Wooddale Baptist Church when it was just a tiny little one. Now they're a big church. But my sister Goya and family attended that church. And I was there for a service, and I spotted Barbie up in the choir, and I wanted to meet her. And so I asked my sister, and she says, well, Vic, her hubby, a little closer to the family than I'll let him introduce you. So after the service, Vic introduced me to Barbie, and I think I called her that afternoon for a date.
That first date, we went roller skating. And that was a big deal back then. They had these roller rinks, and you'd have a really good time for an evening roller skating together. I never even asked my parents if I could go out. I was only 15 and a half. I just said, oh, sure, yeah, I'd like to go. And when I told my parents, they were fine with it. They knew his sister and her family, and knew that they were nice Christian people. So that just started he called me, and we went out regularly until he left to go into the service, which was I think a month or so later. Here I was only 15 and a half. So during my sophomore year in high school and my junior year in high school, he was in the service, and he was in Germany for a year and a half at that time. So I didn't see him, but we had committed ourselves to be going steady. So I wrote to him several times a week, and he wrote to me several times a week. And all my friends in school knew that I had this special guy because he had given me a ring. So I wasn't asked out by any guys at our school, but I had other opportunities to go up, and I never did, because I had said that I would stay true to him until he got home. And here I was only 15 and a half. But that's the way God wanted it to be, I'm sure. My mom had done the same thing, and my brother he didn't get married until he was in his 20s, but he had never dated anybody until he met his wife, and then they married. So we're kind of like committed people. We commit ourselves early and then stay committed.
And what was it about him? What was special about Ron? Why did you want to stay committed? Why did you want to go study with him?
He was just a really fun guy to be with. We had so much fun together when we went out, and I loved his family. My folks loved his family. I mean, we just really hit it off right away. And when he came back then from the service, we had sort of quit writing to each other towards the end because it had been so long. And I thought, well, maybe when he gets back, we'll say, forget it all. But he got back, called me up, we went out, and started all over again. And we just really enjoyed being together. And it wasn't long before we decided, we think we'd like to get married. So I was only 17 when I got an engagement ring, so I was still in high school. Of course, my high school friends, did you know Barb Johnson was engaged? I mean, it was a big deal. So I just had decided by then, that I wasn't going to go to college because I was going to get married. Most of my friends went on to college. So we just had a wonderful courtship. We went together for a year then before, while we were engaged, before we got married. We got engaged on the 30th of November of 56 and got married on the 28th of November on 57, which was my mom and dad's anniversary.
What was it like getting married and you went to Chicago for a honeymoon? Just kind of walk through that time of life.
Well, that was special to us. Like I mentioned earlier, Barbie had never been out and about, done motels and so forth and travel. And so that aspect was special for her. And do you remember the name of the hotel we stayed in Chicago?
No, but I remember the motel we stayed in the night we were married. That was the Biltmore Motel in Minneapolis. It's gone. It's been torn down.
And after that next morning, we went and visited both of our parents. So that was kind of special.
Yeah, that was the morning after the wedding, before our honeymoon.
Yeah, so then we took off, and I had a new 57 Ford, which we enjoyed and had that, drove down there, and the hotel we stayed at was right across the street from the tram thing that ran around in Chicago, and that was up on stilts over the city, kind of, and that was kind of new for both of us to see that. And
it's called the L. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we remember some real fancy restaurant that we went to.
Diamond Jim's?
I think that's it. Yeah,
Diamond Jim's Steakhouse?
It had a nice steak, and I think
I died and gone to heaven.
rather than a tossed salad, we had a half a cut of the whole lettuce, and I remember that for some
I
reason.
don't remember that.
And we visited the museums and had a real good week. And after a few days, I thought we'd run out of money, we better go home. So that was our honeymoon.
That's awesome. You mentioned that you had to take a loan on your insurance claim just to take that trip.
Yeah, I got $700. That afforded me to go to Chicago for a week for a honeymoon.
Maybe I'm assuming too much, but does that mean that you guys didn't have a whole lot of money when you came back? And so
That's putting it.
I think we had $13.
Yeah, but tell about my mom.
And as far as we knew, no food in the house, and both of our parents stacked the refrigerator and the cupboard, so we were very delighted. And then for a good number of years, we pretty much lived week to week and hoped the next week we'd make it.
So if we can go back a little bit, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this wedding.
Okay.
Because things were so much plainer back then. You know, I told you earlier that my mom borrowed a friend's dress when she got married. I borrowed his sister-in-law's dress when she had gotten Penny, Roger's wife. they had just gotten married a year before. So I borrowed her dress, and it was beautiful. I mean, that was no problem. We had a simple wedding. Our reception was held in the basement of the church, which was unfinished, Wooddale Church. It was very, very plain. We had a very simple. It was the evening of Thanksgiving, so we didn't think too many people would come, because at that time you sent out invitations, but there were no replies requested. We weren't registered any place. People just brought whatever they wanted. So two things about it. The lunch was simple. It was cake and ice cream and little fancy sandwiches, but we ran out because we didn't know how many would come. We thought Thanksgiving evening, not that many will come, but they did. And the gifts were just a conglomeration. We got 3 table lamps. One was totally modern. One was kind of traditional, and one was very antique-y. And we used all 3 of them because we don't have anything else. Gifts were simple, and we had 2 of my girlfriends opened all the gifts. We didn't open them. You had somebody open them for you during the reception and lay them out on a table so everybody could see them, and with the card and who they were from, so they were simple.
It was quite a show and tell.
They were simple gifts, but it's what people could afford back then, so. But so we had a simple start, didn't we? But wonderful. We had wonderful years together, that's for sure.
And what were you doing at that time for a job? Were you guys working? I mean, she mentioned she was a secretary.
Let's see, I was. I was working for a corrugated box company, and I worked in the design department. No, I think I had been in the design department for a year, and now I was in the purchasing department, and I did the purchasing. And I went to work for Prudential, and I sold life insurance, health insurance, and my brother Ernie was a Prudential agent, and he thought that's where I needed to be. A bad decision. I hated it.
When did you sell cars?
I sold cars after I left Prudential.
Okay.
And I sold for Bob Knowles Ford for 7 months until I pretty much ran out of my savings. I sold about 7 new cars a month, but you only got $35 commission. So I wasn't going to make enough to support the family. So I left there, and
you had that furniture store too.
Oh, that's right. I went to, had a lot of jobs. I went to work for a fellow that I graduated from high school with, whose dad owned a small furniture store over on, I don't know what that was, about 50th and Nicollet.
It's Palmer Olson, isn't it?
Yeah, Palmer Olson. Anyway, I worked there for X number of months, and when it was real slow, his father owned a hobby farm, and he had horses and so forth. So there was 2 of us guys that worked there in this small furniture store. And so to give us something to do, he had us go out to his dad's little farm and work around the barn. And so when I got back from that, I told him I didn't come here to work in the barn, so he fired me. And yeah, and so then I went home, and we had Cindy, and we were going to have Goya shortly.
No, I think that's when we were expecting Cindy.
Oh, expecting. Anyway,
yeah, I can't.
Barbie's dad was at the house. He used to stop there very frequently and visit Barbie during the day when he was around that area. And I came home having lost my job, and I came in the house, and she wanted to know why I was home, and I said, well, I lost my job. And I can still see her, Dad, you what? Yeah, because I hear the kid on the way, and now I don't have a job, so.
kind of jumping out of timeline again, back earlier, we talked about how you've just been a very respected man of character over the years, and you were a leader. And what did it look like to kind of grow up? I know that you had to stick up for yourself a little bit and got into some scraps. What did that look like, and how have you grown from that, or been able to teach or learn from that, I guess?
Oh, well, that's an area that I guess I'm not proud of, but back in grade school, I was very touchy about being called Dimples. So if
Girls liked it though.
I don't know, but anyway, I didn't like it, and if somebody called me Dimples, they're going to have to pay for it. They're going to have to back off, and so I had a lot of little scraps there. And this is an elementary school, but pretty much there wasn't anybody that bothered me after a while, and I think I only had trouble one time, and I think that was a kid that came into the area that was from junior high, but that one didn't go real well. But and then I had a nature in me to, if somebody was being picked on, especially girls, I immediately stepped in and said or did something. So had a few scraps along the way. I think after I left elementary, I really only had two occasions. I had one, I think in my ninth grade, where one of the students came up to me during the day in the hall and said, "I don't think you're as tough as you think you are." And I says, "Oh?" And he said, I'd like to meet you outside after school. And I said, "Fine." So I went out, and he lasted about 2 minutes, picked up his book and left, and that was the end of that. And I had another occasion where, going back a few years, a new kid came into the neighborhood, and he told me later that he was looking for somebody in the neighborhood who he could challenge and establish himself. So I was walking down the street, I hadn't really met him yet, and he hollered something at me. So I crossed the street and took care of that, and we were good friends after that. So, and Barbie doesn't even know this, but I did make one dumb thing, because I wasn't much for backing off, and I had a girlfriend that I had earlier was trying to contact me again. Anyway, she called, but they must have had some kind of a party line, and some guy that she knew got on there and got kind of smart. So one way or another, I gave him where I lived, and he showed up one night with 3 of his buddies, 4 of them, and I was dumb enough and stubborn enough that I went out in front of the house and got beat up. So
it wasn't all good.
No, and then I think in my senior year, that was the last time I had a scrap. I took on 2 of them, and so I think that was the last. I finally didn't have to go that route anymore. So I'll repeat, I wasn't proud of all this, but it happened.
Yeah, it's part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. What went into the decision when you started trying to have a family and getting excited for that?
Well, we wanted to start our family. Number one, the Lord blessed us with the pregnancy, and I think
we were thrilled.
Yeah, oh yeah. So anyway, she had Cindy, and she was a little dolly, and as both of our kids really were, but that was the first one, and so we were off to a good start. Her parents just idolized Cindy as the first grandchild, and
what was it like to be a young mother once you had Cindy and she came along?
Yeah.
And then another after that. And
yeah.
What was it like to be a mother?
Cindy was a very good baby, and my mom, like he said, my mom just thought she was, sun rose and set on her, and she wasn't working at the time. So I was working, so my mom would come and stay with us, so she could take care of Cindy while I went to work, and my dad would come back and forth. And then she'd stay there 3 nights, and then she'd go to, Ron would drop her off at his mom and dad's for the other 2 nights. And then they took turns. One day it was 3 days for this house and 2 days that house. The next day it switched. Next week it switched. So it was, it was simple. We had, Mom and Dad gave us a sofa for our present, and we had all these different lamps in there, and we had some of my mom's old drapes. I mean, it was simple, but we were so happy. And I just could have kept working till we had more money before we started a family, but we were excited to get going with a family. So we had Cindy 16 months after we were married, and then 2 years later we had our precious Gloria. So, and I loved being a young mom. And that way I was a young grandma and I'm a young great-grandma. So.
What would you say are some of the biggest differences? I mean, you're obviously not raising kids now, but you get to see how your daughters raised kids. What are some of the big differences parenting in the late 50s versus now? My daughters are both very traditional moms, I'd say. They both love to be home with their kids and not have to work. I mean, most mothers their age worked a job and left their kids at daycare or something. Our daughters didn't do that. They were raised in a home where their mom was there with them to take care of them day in and day out. And that's the way they've raised their children. And our grandchildren are doing the same thing. So they realize the value of being with their own children and teaching them their values, not the values of the daycare mom. Today some kids get dropped off at daycare, they get picked up, get fed supper, get put to bed. I mean, how do their parents teach them values that they have, But our daughters, I'm so thankful that Ron ended up getting a wonderful job where I could stay home and be an at-home mom, and I loved it. Yeah. Speaking of your values, your morals, what did faith look like in your family, in your young family? How did that play a part?
I'm sorry.
Your faith in the Lord. How did that play a part in your family when you guys started to raise kids?
Faith?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, definitely. Both of our daughters we had them dedicated to the Lord at church as soon as they were a few months old, and took them to Sunday school when they were just little babies, and church, nursery when they got a little older, and they had wonderful Sunday school teachers that helped teach them about the Lord. And faith was a big part of our family. We wanted our kids to know the Lord, love Him, and serve Him when they grew up, and raise their children the same way that we were.
Thankfully, we attended a church that was extremely warm, and we had wonderful relations with so many people. We just, it was a period in my life where we had just lots of good friends that we fellowshiped with and partied together with. And after Sunday evening services, we always went out for coffee or ice cream or something. So they grew up in an atmosphere like that. So not only did they have the good Sunday school teachers, but they also saw the fellowship that was in our Christian body. And I'm sure that had an effect on them.
And both of our families were believers. His mom and dad and his siblings, and my mom and dad, my brother, we were all believers. So whenever they were together with their cousins, they had the same values that we had, which helped a lot, because we supported each other, and they stayed with us and our kids stayed with them, and we always knew that the values would be the same there, that they would be at our home. So yeah, we had a blessed life, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that.
I've heard it said many times that it takes a village to raise children. How do you feel like the sense of community has changed the way they grew up, just living in that small group of people that just developed them? But it wasn't just you guys, it was your friends as well that had that similar sense of community.
Well, I think that the population has, to a large degree, turned away from Christian values and acceptance of Jesus as our Savior. And early in our marriage, raising the girls, that wasn't the case. To be a Christian, to go to church was, even if you didn't yourself go, it was a normal and respected. Today, Christians are not respected and they're downgraded. And by the way, that makes it a lot harder for my great-grandchildren to grow up in. They're at ages now where they know love and tenderness and the church, but right around the corner, they're going to be faced with this faithless, Christless population.
Now kind of jumping back ahead to marriage and family. What was it like kind of later on? I know that your girls went off to college, I think. What was it like to kind of go through that period of time, teenage girls and raising them?
I think something that was really significant that happened for our girls was that when Cindy started 10th grade, she was in a public school. And we thought she'd do all right. Our kids had gone to public school and done fine. But she came home sometime during that year, I'm not sure, it must have been into the year, part of the ways, crying. And she said, I don't want to go here to that school anymore. I don't know what it was exactly. They were trying to get her to do the things that they did, and she was trying to uphold her Christian values. And it had to have been into the year ways, because we had gotten a letter from some friends of ours, Don and Jean Smith, at Christmas time, and they said that they had sent their son to Minnehaha Academy, which is a Christian school, and how much he loved it and how he was just developing into such a fine person in that school. And he said, I want to go there. And so when she finished her year at, it was Armstrong High School in Plymouth, we decided to enroll her in Minnehaha Academy. And that was just such a blessing. She went through 10th and 11th grade, and then when Gloria started, 11th and 12th grade, graduated from there. Gloria started in 10th grade, so she went there 10th, 11th, and 12th. And that, I don't know how the school is today, but at the time it was very, very fundamental, and they had wonderful friends. Those friends came up to the lake. We had a lake cabin, and they came up there and had fun together, and just, it was just such a blessing that Ron was able to afford to have me stay home with the girls and send them to a Christian high school. It was a wonderful blessing. And then they went to a Christian college as well, Bethel College in St. Paul.
After your kids were gone, what does it look like to see them raise families?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was as exciting as us raising our girls. That was when Colin came along, that brought much happiness into our life.
Yeah, that was great-granddaughter, son.
Yeah, that's great, yeah. And for each one, they've all been special, and partly the reason they're special is the way the parents have raised them.
Do you guys have any specific memories of kind of seeing your grandchildren for the first time, whether that be Cindy's kids or Gloria's kids?
I guess with Gloria, seeing Alyssa for the first time, and after she'd been through such a tough labor and delivery, Kurt rolled Alyssa out in the bassinet, and she looked at us with those big, beautiful brown eyes and blue eyes. Yeah. Anyway, most babies have their eyes shut, but she looked at us just like she knew us, And it was just a thrill to be. I heard one time that someone said, if I'd have known it was going to be so much fun to have grandchildren, I'd have had them first. And really, you know, I mean, as much as I love being a mom, and our girls were wonderful. They never gave us any trouble. They had wonderful friends, and they loved the Lord. But when they had their kids, being a grandparent and being able to enjoy those children, love on them, and send them home when they started getting naughty, that was wonderful. And seeing Natalie and Bryce come and join the family, such a thrill. Each one of those, sorry, each one of those great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren have been such a joy. I'm so glad that I was a young mom so that I got to enjoy it, because I played out on took the list out on the ice, went at our cabin and ice skated with her and went down the hills on the slide with her. I couldn't do that if I was older, you know. So I love being a young grandma and a young mom. And now I guess for my age, I'm a young great-grandma. It's hard to believe.
Tell me about the Potato Man.
Okay. Well, the Potato Man was a little old farmer. I don't know where he lived, but we lived in Brooklyn Park, and Brooklyn Park was pretty far out from the city. So he had a farm somewhere out there, and he raised potatoes. But then he would come into our neighborhood in the summer to sell his potatoes, and they were 100-pound bags. I didn't want 100 pounds of potatoes. But one time I made the mistake of answering the door, and he was real pushy, you know. Here, I'm selling potatoes. You want potatoes? And so I took some. So the next time I saw him coming down the block, I said, "Girls, quick, let's hide in the stairway." So we had a basement, you know, that went off from the kitchen, and the door was right there. So we both girls came running, and I suppose they were only like 5 and 6 or something like that. And I grabbed them both, and we stood a couple stairs down the stairway, and pretty soon, ding. And I said, "Oh, he's still behind." Ding. And I could kind of peek out a little bit and see under the door that he was still there, you know. So we waited until he finally gave up and left. And we made sure we stayed down the stairway a little ways so he wouldn't see us going down the street when he was going down the street. It was just, I mean, it was probably fine, but he was kind of a cranky looking guy and was dressed shabbily, and I just didn't like how pushy he was. So I think I kind of scared the girls, thinking it was the boogeyman or something. You know, when the kids are little, you say, "No, the boogeyman's going to get you if you're naughty," you know. So he kind of looked to them like that maybe was who he was.
Potato Man's gonna get you.
Yeah.
Would he yell anything when he's coming down?
No, just potatoes. Yeah, potatoes. People knew he was coming. He had his old truck, you know, with the open bed in the back and full of potatoes. I don't know how many people bought them from him, but it must have been enough that he came back. I don't know how many times we hid in the stairway, but at least once.
So they liked to get a hold of Cindy as often as they could, and every place they went where they asked us if she could go, we'd say yes. But one time they were going down to Iowa to a wedding, and they were going to get home late at night, and they wanted to bring Cindy. And for the first time we said no. And on the way back, her mother was killed in the accident, and her dad was badly injured. So Cindy may not have lived through that. So that was of the Lord. It was the first time we told him he can't. So that was an experience that we went through. We lost her mom, and her dad was in tough shape. We didn't know if he'd live. So.
Well, this is kind of a hard pivot, but I know that when your mom passed and your dad was in that accident with her,
Yeah.
that was really hard on your family.
That was probably not much after the Potato Man story, because we were still living in that house. I had been to, I guess we both had been to a evening of wonderful singing with friends from Wooddale Baptist Church, including the pastor, who was Peter Unruh at the time, singing praises to the Lord. And we got home about midnight, I guess it was, and we'd just gotten to bed, and the phone rang. And it was my uncle. My mom had gone down to, well, I think Ron said earlier, there was a wedding in the family down in northern Iowa. And my mom had gone down there, my mom and dad, and another lady that rode with them went down to that wedding. And coming home in southern Minnesota, Faribault actually, they encountered a drunk driver coming down the wrong side of the freeway. And it was, of course, pitch dark out, and there was a curve in the road, so my mom didn't have time to realize that he was in the wrong lane and hit them head on. Probably, she was probably going 65, 70, and maybe he was, so it was just an immediate crash, terrible crash, and my mom was killed instantly. My dad was in critical condition because he was sitting in the front seat. She was driving, so the steering wheel went into her chest and killed her. My dad was a passenger, and I think he was maybe had fallen asleep. So, but he pitched forward. They didn't have the padded dashes then, so his face was just terribly messed up. Plus, they had a seat belt. They had seat belts. So that seat belt had tightened so bad that it perforated his bowel. They didn't know that until after they got him in the hospital for a while. Anyway, we got this phone call a little after midnight saying that I'd been in this accident and my mother had been killed. So Ron and I got the girls up, but we didn't want to tell them. They were 5 and 7. We didn't want to tell them and then leave them because we had to go down there. It was about an hour and a half drive. So we just said, my grandma and grandpa were in an accident. We need to go down and see them. So we're going to take you to Grandma and Grandpa Martin's house for the night. So they were fine with that. They were half asleep. So we took them over there and drove down to southern Minnesota there. And did Pastor Unruh come? I know a couple of people from church had heard about it, and they came and were supportive for us. But after we'd been there a while, of course, it was very, very late, so we got a motel and went and had a very fitful sleep. And then about 9 in the morning, there was this rap on the door at the motel. And I remember this Charlie Jones, he worked for a funeral home, knocking on the door and said, we've got your mom in the hearse. That was 53 years ago. But oh my, we missed her so much. Our girls were only 5 and 7. So then we had to go back home and tell them that their grandma had been killed. But Gloria was only 5, so she didn't really understand very much about it, but Cindy was terribly broken. Well, then my dad was he was in critical condition. So he was in the hospital there in Faribault for a week, excuse me. And then they decided to transfer him up to Minneapolis so that we could be with him. So he was actually ended up in the hospital for a month. And he was unconscious. So he didn't even know my mother. He didn't even know that he'd been in an accident or that my mother had died. So we had to have the funeral before he even came out of his being unconscious. So I remember when he was starting to wake up, because he would say, wheeze, wheeze every once in a while. My mother's name was Louise. And I'd think, we're going to have to tell him. So I called our pastor and I said, would you come and tell him? So he did, and of course it was a terrible shock to my dad. He hardly even believed it. I don't think he really believed it until he was well enough for me to take her to her grave. But then we took him home with us. We had this little 3-bedroom house. Our 2 girls were sleeping in 1 bedroom, so we made what we had used as a den into a hospital room for him after he got out of the hospital a month later. And I took care of him then and drove him back. His eyes were just terribly messed up. He had many, many surgeries. And I kept running him back and forth to the hospital in Southdale because that's where his doctor was. Anyway, that was a real traumatic time. But that was, I think the Lord brought me closer to him because I had to lean on him, for comfort and peace, and also for strength to take care of a husband, 2 kids, a house, and my dad, who was critically injured. So, but we made it through that, and we grew through it, and God was good. And we know my mother's with the Lord. So is my dad now. And someday we'll be reunited. Yep. But my kids missed out on a wonderful grandma. His mom was a wonderful grandma too, but she had a lot of other grandchildren. These were my mother's only 2 grandchildren. My brother had just been married not very long and had a 3-month-old daughter. And they were living in the basement of my mom and dad's house. It was a finished basement. So he wasn't much help. It was all on our shoulders. But like I say, God got us through. And Ron's mom became very special to me. She took me under her wings, became a mom to me, because I was only 28 with 2 little girls. So that was, well, I think I told him earlier that I had not had any experiences in my life up to that point. And not too long before that, I had been studying the Bible, and it said, "Whom the Lord loves, he chastens." And I said, "Lord, you've never chastened me. Don't you love me?" And it was shortly after that, just very shortly after that this accident happened. I thought, yeah, he loves me. And I'll never pray that again because it was such a life-changing experience. But we made it, didn't we?
It sure looks like it.
Yeah.
I don't mean to press too far, but if she was here, is there something that you'd want to say to her?
If she was here,
Mm-hmm.
oh, just how much I loved her. How much I missed her, not being there for me and my family. She was so much fun. She was the organizer in her family. Any get-togethers that were taking place, my mom did it. She had the company. She passed that on to me. I've been the organizer for our family, and now Gloria's doing it, so it kind of passes down from one generation to the next. But I guess, the biggest thing was just I never got to hear her story, really, like you're hearing ours. Just kind of had to pick up bits and pieces. She had 3 sisters and 3 brothers. So, and my mom was only 51. She had these precious little grandchildren that she didn't get to see grow up like I have gotten to see mine grow up. So, but I was very, very thankful for Ron's mom. She was very sweet and very special, and she lived with us for a while. My dad had lived with us for over a year, and then he got a job but wasn't able to drive because his eyes weren't fixed yet. So he lived downtown in a little apartment or a little room or something. And every weekend I'd go and get him and bring him to our house for the weekend. So he was special to us too.
You mentioned how you wish that you could still hear stories from her and from your grandma, and now you're in the place of being able to tell stories.
Yeah.
Are there anything about your grandchildren when they were young, specific stories that you'd love to tell about them growing up that their kids and grandkids might want to hear?
Yeah. Well, Glory was my funny one. Yeah, she was a funny little girl. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
We would go up to see his mother and sister up in River Falls, Wisconsin, and Glory would entertain them. She especially liked to pretend like she was a doctor. And then she would go around to them and she'd say, "I can see you have scoliosis," or some made-up disease. They just got the biggest kick out of her. She was a very, very fun little girl, and lovely woman, of course. But yeah, I enjoyed both of our daughters so much. Cindy was more serious. Gloria was the one that played with dolls a lot, so I knew she would be a wonderful mother. She loved babies and dolls. Cindy was more the teacher, and she was always the leader of the group when the kids were together in the neighborhood. Cindy, I'd like to be have everybody following her. And then I guess, oh yes, the balloon story. We used to go to this little, it was a buffet type of a restaurant. I don't remember the name of it. After church on Sunday, we went there quite often. And when we got done eating, if you had children with you, they would give each of the children a balloon. And it was a helium balloon, you know, so it's up in the air. Cindy was in, I think, kindergarten, and Gloria was still home. So Cindy went off to school the next morning. They each had their balloons, but somehow during the night, Gloria's balloon had deflated.
Cindy's.
Huh?
Cindy's deflated.
What you
traded, remember?
Oh yeah, you traded. Well, no, I think your balloon had deflated, and so I said, "Oh, honey, your balloon lost." No, Grandma. She says, "Last night Cindy and I traded balloons, and this one is really mine. The one that was still." Well, they hadn't traded balloons. She was just trying to get one that was bigger.
Stories change.
Yeah. So she had. All of a sudden, it became Cindy's balloon, the one that was dead. Yeah.
No, remember, we switched because you said you could blow it up even bigger.
Yeah.
So then when you were blowing
Oh,
it
it
up,
popped.
blowing
Yeah.
it popped, and then I said, "Oh, there goes Cindy's balloon."
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I guess I changed the story a little bit. That was a long time ago. How can you remember?
I've heard it many times. Are there any other
That's what I'm trying.
fond memories or anything that you want to share about Cindy and I growing up or anything?
Yeah.
The lake or holidays or birthdays or anything?
Dress up Buggy like a little doll.
Oh yeah. Gloria would. We had this little dog called Buffy, and she was Gloria's favorite of all animals or people almost. She was so special to her, and like Gloria said, this little puppy came into our lives right after she'd lost her grandparents through my mom, and then his dad died a year later. So anyway, we had this little Buffy, and Buffy must have been part person because you could do anything to that little dog, and she did not. She would just go along with it. So Gloria would dress her up in little doll clothes and put a little doll bonnet on her and put her in her little stroller and wheel her around. She'd just sit there. This is a dog, you know. Gloria was just crazy about that dog, but we didn't have her very long.
We all were.
Yeah, she was such a special. I mean, she was so. I mean, when Gloria calls her dogs, they don't come. But Buffy, she was so obedient. She would just come if you called. She would do anything for you. She was so devoted, especially to Gloria. But what was it you just said?
Pardon?
About what was it you just said?
Well, I just mentioned about dressing her up
Dressing her
and
up,
so
yeah.
forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you want to get
Yeah.
into her back and how.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Buffy did only live to be about 6, and she had a spinal injury where she lost the use of her back legs, and we had to have her put down, and that was a terrible experience, especially for Gloria, because she lost her best friend,
Yeah.
really. So
You've mentioned that Cindy was a teacher, a leader of the two at least. Do you have any specific memories of that when she was really the center of attention and getting something done?
well, yeah, I think Cindy had been the only grandchild for a while, first grandchild on my parents' side, so maybe she kind of liked bossing her little sister around, and Gloria was pretty good about following the leader. And the neighborhood kids were too, I guess. But of course, both of the girls were wonderful little children. And
If we want to pivot toward kind of more of the blessing
Yeah.
that we had talked about, something that you want to give that they can keep for Gloria and for Cindy, and then kind of more general and for the grandchildren. But if you want to start with your daughters and just a specific blessing or something that you're really proud of, when you knew that they cared about you and how much they mean to you,
Yeah.
something. Okay.
obviously meant a lot to us. Like Barbie had said earlier, they were easy to raise. They didn't cause a lot of trouble, thank goodness. And we got a hold of a lake place, and we wanted that to be a place of a family. If we hadn't had the lake place, they would have been off and gone with neighbor kids and friends and so forth. But by going to the lake, we were a family for the weekend, and that was a nice time with the girls, and swimming and fishing and
Oh, yeah.
what?
Water skiing.
Oh yeah, all the sports.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was the best part of that lake place, is that we had the girls, and then they had their friends up frequently, especially as they got a little older. So good years, and had accepted Christ as our Savior early on. So the church and Sunday school and fellowship with other Christians, we could see them developing in their faith, and they never wavered from it. So we were blessed.
Yeah. Now that you've seen them walk through a lot of their life, what are you most proud of specifically for Cindy and specifically with Gloria? What are you guys most proud of?
Well, I don't know. Both the girls are very strong, really reach out to serve the Lord. Wherever they can, they get involved, and most all of it has to do with their faith and concern that those are having trouble, that they can be a part of the solution. And so it's pretty special to have two daughters as strong as they are in life, and their faith, and the way they've raised their families, both of them. All of the kids are well aware of God and Jesus and all that's been done for them, and it's great to know that when we get to heaven, our circle won't be broken. We'll all be there, and I appreciate that.
I've been so blessed with wonderful daughters. Now that we're older, they care for us. And we're not to the point we need a lot of care yet, but if we do, we know that they're there. They're going to be there for us, and we want to be here for them too. That's why we want to move into the cities, so that we can get help when we need it, but that we can give them whatever help we're able to give them too. And both of them, like Ron said, strong leaders in their churches. Cindy was a fundraiser for a evangelist, and Gloria has been wonderful to be a mentor to so many different women. And one of the recent blessings in our lives with Gloria is that she's come down and taught our Sunday school class in Florida for us, 3 years now, I think, or 4 maybe. Giving up part of her vacation to study and teach a lesson, and we love it. We're so proud of her, and they love it, having somebody that's spent the time to do that. And Cindy comes as often as she can, is willing and able to help us with whatever we need. And we just enjoy the fellowship that we have with our daughters, but we also appreciate their husbands. They've been wonderful providers. They've been able to be home with their families, raise their children, because their husbands have provided well for them and loved them and cared for them and been good dads and now good grandpas. Our daughters have grandchildren, and they're wonderful with them. Lori and Kurt brought these precious kids over from India to be part of our family, and there's no greater joy than to know that your children are following in the faith, and that you'll be together forever someday. And that is and we pray for them. Of course, we pray for all of them regularly. And God has been faithful.
even before we get into kind of the blessing aspect right now, what advice would you have for your great-grandchildren who are growing up in a place where they might not be accepted as much as it was, especially their faith? Do you have any advice for them?
Well, I hope that what they see in us and the churches that they're attending, that they see an everlasting value. And I hope that they're able to realize that this life is very short and eternity is forever. And that's a huge value if they can get a hold of that. We got a few years here to have the opportunity to worship our Creator. And if they can get a good grip on that, they'll be okay. But I think it's important that family continues to be a strong Christian example, because boy, when they get into the world, there's going to be a lot of things tugging them, and hopefully they won't be strong enough to diminish their faith and the values that they grew up with.
Speaking of your grandchildren, what's kind of one final send-off that you'd love to say to your grandchildren specifically?
Our grandchildren have been a great joy to us, starting with Alyssa, and now she's got her two little her two little baby boys that are growing up now that have been such a joy. Just keep the faith, because there's nothing else that's more important in life. I mean, you can have fun, you can go off and get into the world and get lost in the things of the world, but that won't last. Someday you're going to meet your Maker, just like we are. And you're going to have to account for what you've done in your life. And so please follow the Lord. Don't let him down. Don't let us down, because we want to be together forever.
Cindy's grandchildren too.
Yeah, well, Cindy's got wonderful. I didn't mean to leave them out. Cindy's grandchildren, I don't get to see very much of them because her two daughters are in California, but they're serving the Lord and raising their children to love the Lord too. And even though they don't really exactly want to be in California, that's where God wants them to be, and they're answering that call to serve Him there. And so we're very proud of them too, and love their little kids, which even though we don't see much of them. Now we've got new great grandbaby up in Fargo, North Dakota, that we hope to be able to see a little more often than the others. But their daughters have been blessed with wonderful husbands that provide well for them, so that they were able to be stay-at-home moms. And now our grandchildren have the same privilege. And I'm hoping and praying that that'll go on from generation to generation, because there's nothing more important than being raised by your own mom, just like we were, and Gloria was, and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Ron
and Barb Martin.
Yeah,
yes.
Right, yeah, husband and wife.
Yeah. For all going on 62 years, God has blessed us. Yeah, and we don't know how much more time we have to be together, but we know that whatever time it is, we will continue to love each other and our family and the Lord. And when our time comes, He'll take us home to be with Him.
Yeah, I encourage the family to stay close to the Lord, and don't take yourself too serious in life. And just something as a good idea is when you've made a wrong and you realize it, it's time to apologize every time.